Eli James pushed through the gleaming glass doors of Walton Industries, his face a mask of quiet confidence as he stepped into the sleek, modern office. The polished floors and minimalist decor screamed corporate ambition, but Eli wasn't here to admire the aesthetics. This wasn't just his first day at a new job, it was the opening act of a carefully planned investigation. In a matter of weeks, Eli would take the helm as the company's new CEO. But for now, he was an undercover, posing as an ordinary new hire to uncover the truth about the toxic culture that had been festering within the company's walls. The board had brought him in for a reason: whispers of discrimination, favoritism, and a workplace environment that crushed morale had reached the ears of Jim Hartman, Walton Industries founder. Hartman wanted change, and Eli was the man to deliver it. But Eli wasn't the type to storm in with grand gestures. He needed to see the company's underbelly for himself, to understand the rot from the ground up. That meant starting at the bottom, blending in as just another face in the crowd. No one knew who he really was, not yet, and that anonymity was his greatest asset. As he approached the elevators, the receptionist barely glanced up from her screen, her fingers clacking away at the keyboard. Employees hurried past, their eyes skimming over him with the indifference reserved for new hires. To them, Eli was invisible, just another cog in the machine. Perfect. When the elevator doors opened on the second floor, he was greeted by Brad Thompson, his assigned manager. Brad was tall, with slicked back hair and a smirk that oozed self-importance. Even before he opened his mouth, Eli could feel the man's arrogance radiating like heat from a furnace. Eli James Brad's handshake was unnecessarily firm, his tone carrying a hint of challenge. "That's me," Eli replied, his voice steady and unruffled. Brad's eyes narrowed, his smile tight as he sized Eli up. "Welcome to the team. I'm your manager. We move fast around here, so you'd better keep up. Can't have anyone dragging us down." Eli nodded, his expression neutral. "I'll manage." Brad's gaze lingered a moment too long, his lips twitching as if he were suppressing a comment. "We don't get a lot of new hires like you," he said, the words draped in a veneer of politeness but heavy with implication. "Hope you can handle the pressure." Eli didn't flinch. He'd heard lines like that before too many times to count. But he wasn't here to pick fights. "Not yet. I'm sure I'll fit in just fine," he said, his tone calm but firm. Brad's smirk widened, clearly pleased with his own jab. "We'll see. Follow me." As they wove through to the bustling office, Eli noticed how Brad made no effort to introduce him to anyone. The other employees barely looked up from their screens, their faces lit by the cold glow of monitors. The atmosphere was sterile, disconnected, a far cry from the collaborative spirit the company touted in its mission statement. Eli's eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail: the hurried whispers, the averted glances, the tension that hung in the air like a fog. This was exactly what he'd expected. Brad led him to a cramped cubicle tucked in the far corner of the floor, isolated from the rest of the team. With a theatrical wave of his hand, he gestured to the tiny workspace. "This is your spot. You'll start with data entry and cross-checking reports. Basic stuff. Think you can handle it?" Eli eased into the chair, his movements deliberate. "Absolutely." Brad crossed his arms, his posture radiating authority. "Good. We run a tight ship here. I expect efficiency. No excuses." Without waiting for a response, he turned and strode away, leaving Eli to settle in. As Eli logged into the system, his mind wasn't on the mundane tasks in front of him. The reports, the data entry, they were irrelevant. His real work was observation. Already, he could see the cracks in Walton Industries' facade, Brad's subtle jab, the cold indifference of the office, the way the team seemed to shrink in on itself. It all pointed to a deeper problem. This wasn't just one bad manager. It was a culture that had been allowed to fester, a place where people like Brad thrived while others were sidelined. Eli had heard the rumors about Walton Industries being an old boys club, a place where connections trumped talent and certain voices were silenced. Now he was seeing it firsthand. Eli knew his mission: expose the truth, gather evidence, and dismantle the toxic systems that had taken root. In a few weeks, when he stepped into the CEO's office, he wouldn't just be taking charge, he'd be tearing down the structures that allowed people like Brad to flourish. For now, though, he'd play the part of the quiet, competent new hire. He'd keep his head down, watch, and wait. Because when the time came, Brad and everyone else who'd enabled this culture wouldn't see him coming. As the day wound down, Eli leaned back in his chair, the office emptying around him. To everyone else, he was just another employee, blending into the background. But not for long. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Adam. The next morning, Eli arrived early, slipping into his cubicle before the office buzzed to life. The hum of computers and the soft clatter of keyboards soon filled the space as the team trickled in. To them, Eli was just the new guy, tasked with the kind of grunt work Brad didn't bother with himself. But Eli's focus was elsewhere. Every interaction, every glance, every word spoken in the office was a piece of the puzzle he was assembling. Brad sauntered in late, as expected, his presence commanding attention in all the wrong ways. Eli watched from the corner of his eye, noting how the team's energies shifted when Brad passed by. It wasn't respect that followed him, it was unease. The employees' shoulders tensed, their conversations hushed. Brad didn't inspire, he intimidated. Eli had seen this kind of leadership before, a manager who ruled through subtle power plays, keeping everyone on edge. James Brad's voice cut through the hum of the office, sharp and commanding. Eli looked up as Brad approached, a stack of papers in hand. I need you to cross-check these reports with last month's figures. Data's in the system. I want it done by noon. No mistakes. Eli took the papers, scanning them briefly. The task was mind-numbingly simple, something a basic algorithm could have handled in minutes. Brad was testing him, underestimating him. I'll have it done, Eli said, his tone even. Brad's lips curled into a half-smile, as if he expected Eli to fumble. Good. Keep me posted. He turned and walked away, his stride exuding confidence. Eli settled back at his desk, flipping through the reports. He finished the task in half the time Brad had allotted, leaving him free to observe the office dynamics. Brad's management style was a masterclass in passive-aggressive control. He didn't shout or berate, at least not overtly. Instead, he wielded sarcasm and backhanded comments like weapons, chipping away at his team's confidence. Eli watched as Brad leaned over the desk of a younger employee, Matt, who'd asked for clarification on a project. What? You need me to hold your hand through this. Matt Brad's voice was loud enough to carry across the office, his tone dripping with mockery. I thought we hired adults here. Matt's face flushed, his voice faltering as he mumbled an apology. No, I just wanted to make sure. Maybe try paying attention next time. Brad cut him off, his smile sharp. I'm not your babysitter. The exchange was over in seconds, but the damage lingered. Matt shrank back, his confidence visibly shaken. Eli made a mental note. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was a pattern. Brad's behavior was a slow poison, eroding morale and fostering a culture of fear. It was no wonder turnover was high and engagement was low. Brad didn't just manage his team, he lorded over them, treating his position like a crown and his employees like subjects. Later that morning, Eli approached Brad's office to drop off the completed reports. The door was open, and Brad lounged behind his desk, scrolling through his phone with the nonchalance of someone who delegated everything important. Eli knocked lightly on the frame. All done, he said, holding out the reports. Brad barely looked up, his fingers still swiping across his screen. That was fast. You sure it's right? Positive, Eli replied, his voice steady. Brad finally met his gaze, his eyes narrowing as if searching for a crack in Eli's confidence. He snatched the papers, flipping through them with exaggerated scrutiny. We'll see. If there's a single mistake, I'll know about it. Eli didn't react, letting Brad bask in his illusion of control. It was clear Brad saw him as just another subordinate, someone to be managed and dismissed. That was fine. Eli didn't need Brad's approval, he needed his ignorance. The less Brad suspected, the better. Hmm. That afternoon, the team gathered in a conference room for a brief meeting. Eli took a seat in the back, his presence unobtrusive as he watched Brad take center stage. Brad ran the meeting with his usual air of superiority, his voice carrying a mix of condescension and self-assurance. His agenda was peppered with offhand remarks that made the team shift uncomfortably in their seats. "We've got some new hires coming in soon," Brad said, his eyes flicking briefly toward Eli. "Let's hope we don't get swamped with any diversity hires this time." A few awkward chuckles rippled through the room, though most of the team kept their eyes glued to their notebooks, avoiding eye contact. Eli's face remained impassive, but the comment hit its mark, just as Brad had intended. It wasn't just a joke, it was a signal, a reminder of who held power and who didn't. Eli knew these microaggressions weren't isolated. They were woven into the fabric of Walton Industries, a symptom of a culture that had gone unchecked for far too long. Brad wrapped up the meeting with a hollow motivational speech, filled with self-congratulation and vague platitudes about hard work and team effort. Eli left the room with a clearer picture of the challenges ahead. Brad wasn't just a bad manager, he was a symptom of a deeper disease. The company's toxic culture had been built on years of unchecked behavior, and Brad was its poster child. But Eli wasn't here to patch things up. He was here to rebuild from the ground up. The next day, an email from Brad pinged in Eli's inbox, inviting the team to a team-building lunch. The message was dressed up in corporate buzzwords: collaboration, connection, camaraderie, but Eli saw it for what it was, another stage for Brad to assert his dominance. Still, it was an opportunity to observe the team dynamics outside the office. So Eli went along. The restaurant was a short walk from the office, its upscale decor a stark contrast to the cold efficiency of Walton Industries. The team settled around a long table, with Brad naturally claiming the head seat, his posture relaxed but commanding. Eli chose a spot near the far end, blending in as he watched Brad steer the conversation. After a few minutes, Brad turned his attention to Eli, his smile sharp and calculating. "So, Eli, how's it going?" "Getting the hang of things." "Everything's going smoothly," Eli said, his tone even. Brad chuckled, the sound laced with condescension. "Yeah, it's pretty simple stuff right now. Probably easier if you don't overthink it. Some people try too hard when they're new." His gaze lingered on Eli, the implication clear. Eli met his eyes, unflinching. "I'm comfortable with the pace." Brad shrugged, as if Eli's confidence was inconsequential. "Good. We like to keep things efficient. No need to complicate things." The conversation shifted to company gossip, with one team member mentioning rumors about the new CEO. Brad leaned back, his smirk returning. "Whoever it is, they better not shake things up too much. We've got a good thing going here." Eli sipped his water, hiding a faint smile. Brad had no idea how much was about to change. For now, Eli played his role, observing, listening, and cataloging every detail. But when the moment came to reveal his true identity, Brad's world would turn upside down, and Eli would be ready. The office hummed with its usual rhythm, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. Brad, a man who thrived on control, was never one to let a challenge slide. His confidence, often cloaked in charm, had a sharp edge, and Eli had felt it from the moment they met. Today, that edge was unmistakable. It started over lunch a few days earlier, in the company break room at Walton Industries. The team had gathered around a long table, the air thick with casual chatter and the scent of takeout. Brad, as always, took center stage, orchestrating the scene like a seasoned performer. He'd announced the lunch that morning with a booming voice, making sure every corner of the office knew he was footing the bill. To most, it seemed like a generous gesture, but Eli saw it for what it was, a calculated move to reinforce Brad's dominance after their earlier clash. The week prior, during another team lunch, Brad had let slip a comment that hung in the air like smoke. "I've been hearing about this new CEO," he'd said, leaning back in his chair with a knowing smirk. "All whispers for now, but you know how people love to gossip. I just hope they don't go overboard with this diversity hire stuff. The words were casual, almost tossed off, but they landed heavily. A few team members exchanged uneasy glances, their forks pausing midair. No one spoke up. Eli, sitting across the table, felt the weight of the remark settle over the room. It wasn't overt, but it was clear Brad was drawing a line, signaling his resistance to anything or anyone that might disrupt his carefully curated status quo. Eli had stayed quiet, his eyes fixed on Brad, noting the way he steered the conversation back to safer ground. The rest of the lunch unfolded predictably, with Brad holding court, tossing out quips that carried just a hint of exclusion. Each one was subtle, designed to remind everyone of their place in his hierarchy. As they left the restaurant, Brad clapped Eli on the shoulder with a grin. "Good to have you on board, Eli. Just keep doing what you're doing, and you'll fit right in." "No need to rock the boat, right?" Eli offered a polite smile, his voice steady. "I'll keep that in mind." But inside, he knew Brad's words weren't a welcome, they were a warning. Back at the office, Eli replayed the moment. Brad's attitude wasn't just about maintaining control. It was about keeping people like Eli, people who didn't fit his mold, in check. The comment about diversity hires wasn't a one-off. It was a window into Brad's worldview, one that valued conformity over competence. Eli knew he'd have to tread carefully. Brad wasn't just a colleague, he was a gatekeeper, and Eli was already on his radar. By Friday, the office buzzed with pre-weekend energy, and Brad was back in his element. He decided to treat the team to lunch again, this time with takeout delivered to the break room. "Lunch on me." Everyone he'd declared that morning, striding through the cubicles like a king tossing coins to his subjects. Eli watched from his desk, sensing the undercurrent of Brad's generosity. This wasn't about feeding the team. It was about reasserting his authority after Eli had quietly challenged him earlier in the week. At the previous lunch, Eli had refused to take Brad's bait, meeting his subtle jabs with calm defiance. Today felt like round two. The break room was packed by noon, with the team milling around a table piled high with takeout bags. Brad moved through the crowd with theatrical flair, handing out orders like a benevolent ruler. "Sarah, here's your salad," he said with a warm smile, placing the container in front of her. "Matt, burger for you, man. Enjoy." The team laughed and nodded, caught up in Brad's performance. But when he reached Eli, seated toward the back, the air shifted. Brad held Eli's takeout bag just a moment too long, his grin widening as he locked eyes with him. "Looks like we've got nothing for you, Eli," he said, raising his eyebrows in mock surprise. "Sorry, no fried chicken in the order today." The room fell silent, the words slicing through the chatter like a blade. A few team members glanced at each other, their discomfort palpable. Others stared at their plates, unwilling to get involved. The joke wasn't about food, it was about power. Brad was testing Eli, trying to diminish him in front of the team, expecting a laugh to seal his victory. Eli didn't flinch. His face remained calm, his eyes steady on Brad's. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "Brad," he asked, his voice low but firm. The question hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Brad's grin faltered, just for a split second, before he forced a laugh. "Come on, man, it's just a joke. You gotta lighten up. We keep things easy going around here." Eli didn't break eye contact. "I'm just trying to understand the joke. What's funny about it?" The room grew quieter still, the tension crackling like static. Sarah shifted in her seat, her eyes darting to Brad, waiting for his response. A few others exchanged nervous glances. Sensing the shift in the room, Brad's smile wavered again, but he tried to brush it off. "It's just, we're all having fun here. Don't be so serious. Eli, it's nothing personal." Eli leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. "I'm not taking it personally. I just don't see what's funny about leaving me out and making that comment. Maybe you can explain it to me." Brad's discomfort was now unmistakable. His hand tightened around the takeout bag, his usual confidence shrinking under Eli's unflinching gaze. The break room was a vacuum, every pair of eyes locked on the exchange. "Look," Brad said, his laugh strained, "it's just a joke. All right, I didn't mean anything by it." Eli's voice stayed calm, but there was a steel edge to it now. You seem to make a lot of those jokes, Brad, and they're always aimed in the same direction. Brad's face flushed, his bravado crumbling. For the first time since Eli had joined the team, Brad looked unsteady, his eyes darting around the room for support. But no one met his gaze, not even the usual sycophants who laughed at his quips. The silence was deafening. All right, Brad muttered, waving a hand dismissively. Let's just get back to lunch, okay? No need to make a big deal out of nothing. Eli didn't respond immediately. He let the silence stretch, just long enough to make it clear he wasn't backing down. Then, with a slow nod, he leaned forward. Sure, let's get back to lunch. The words were polite, but they carried weight. The room exhaled, but the easy chatter from earlier was gone, replaced by a strained hush. Brad resumed handing out food. His usual swagger noticeably dimmed. The team kept their eyes on their plates, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Brad had tried to flex his authority, but Eli had turned the moment against him, exposing the fragility of his control. To most in the room, it might have seemed like a minor exchange, but Eli knew better. Brad had been humiliated, and men like Brad didn't take kindly to that. As the team filed out of the break room, Brad lingered near the door, his eyes burning into Eli's back. Eli could feel the anger radiating from him, the silent promise of retaliation. Brad caught up with him just outside the break room, his voice low but laced with irritation. Look, man, don't take what I said too seriously. All right, it was just a little ribbing. You get how it is around here, right? We all joke around. Eli turned to face him, his expression still unreadable. Sure, I get it. But just so you know, I'm not the kind of person you can rib like that. So I'd appreciate it if we kept things professional. Brad's eyes flashed with a mix of frustration and wounded pride, but he forced a nod. Yeah, sure. Professional. Eli nodded once and walked away, leaving Brad standing by the door, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Back at his desk, Eli knew this was far from over. Brad wasn't the type to let a public slight go unanswered. The man had built his identity on being untouchable, and Eli had just cracked that facade. The next move would come, Eli could feel it brewing. But for now, he'd won the first round, and the entire office had witnessed it. By Monday, the office felt different. The break room incident had left an invisible mark, rippling through the team like a stone dropped in still water. No one spoke of it directly, but Eli noticed the subtle shifts, the way colleagues glanced at him with a mix of respect and curiosity, the way they moved more cautiously around Brad. The balance of power had tilted, however slightly, and Brad wasn't about to let it stand. Eli sensed trouble brewing from the moment Brad approached his desk mid-morning. With a casual flick of his wrist, Brad dropped a stack of documents onto Eli's desk. Need this done by end of day, he said, barely making eye contact. Shouldn't be too hard, but make sure it's right. No room for mistakes. His tone was clipped, each word a challenge. Eli glanced at the papers, a routine data comparison project. Nothing unusual at first glance, but something felt off. The reports were a mess, with key data points missing and instructions deliberately vague. This wasn't just a task, it was a trap. Some of these data points are missing, Eli said. Looking up, do you have the source files for these? Brad's eyes narrowed, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Everything should be in there. If it's not, you'll just have to figure it out. The words were a dare, a clear message fail, and I win. Brad was betting on Eli stumbling under the pressure, giving him an excuse to reassert his dominance. Eli didn't blink. I'll have it done, he said, his voice steady. Brad's smirk lingered for a moment before he turned and walked away, confident he'd set the stage for Eli's downfall. But Eli wasn't about to let that happen. He dove into the project, sifting through the disorganized reports, cross-referencing what little data he had, and piecing together the gaps Brad had left. It was tedious, time-consuming work, but Eli was meticulous. He knew Brad was watching, waiting for a mistake. By early afternoon, Sarah from HR stopped by his desk. She'd become a quiet ally over the past few weeks, her sharp intuition picking up on the undercurrents in the office. "Hey, Eli," she said, lowering her voice. "Just a heads up, Brad's been asking around about your work. He's looking for something to pin on you." Eli nodded, unsurprised. "Thanks, Sarah, I appreciate it." She gave him a small smile before walking away, her warning confirming what Eli already knew: Brad was coming for him. As the day wore on, Eli worked relentlessly, double-checking every detail. By the time he submitted the project to Brad, it was flawless, despite the obstacles. Brad's reaction was telling: a curt nod, his jaw tight. As he skimmed the report, he'd been outmaneuvered again, and the frustration was written all over his face. Eli leaned back in his chair, the weight of the day settling over him. This was only the beginning. Brad wouldn't stop until he'd regained control, and Eli knew the next move would be bigger, bolder. But he was ready. He'd already shown the office and Brad that he wasn't someone to be underestimated. Whatever came next, Eli would face it head-on, just as he had today. Sarah was a keen observer, her sharp eyes missing little in the chaotic swirl of Walton Industries. She carried her own quiet frustrations with the company's mismanagement, a sentiment that simmered beneath her professional exterior. Lately, her path had crossed more often with Eli's as he took on bigger projects, his presence in the office growing harder to ignore. Sarah didn't know the full extent of Eli's role, nobody did, but she sensed he wasn't just another cog in the machine. There was something about him, a clarity in how he navigated the company's tangled web of dysfunction, that set him apart. In their brief hallway chats, Sarah had dropped subtle hints about her disdain for Brad's heavy-handed management style, though she was always careful to keep her words vague. HR had its boundaries, especially in a place like Walton, where policies were more decoration than doctrine. Still, Eli valued her restraint and the quiet warnings she slipped him when trouble was brewing. Today, Sarah's usual poise was tinged with caution. She leaned casually against the wall of Eli's cubicle, her voice hushed, meant for his ears alone. "Brad's been, well, let's just say he's been on edge since Friday," she said, choosing her words with care. "Keep your eyes open, Eli." Eli didn't look up from the report he was studying, his focus unwavering. "I've noticed. He's setting me up, isn't he?" Sarah glanced around the office, ensuring no one was eavesdropping. "I wouldn't say this to just anyone, but you're not the first he's tried to scapegoat. He's done this before." She paused, then added softly, "Just be careful. Brad doesn't take kindly to losing." Eli gave a small nod, his face unreadable. "Thanks for the tip, Sarah." She lingered a moment longer, as if weighing whether to say more, then turned and walked away. Eli's mind was already churning, calculating his next move. He'd seen this coming. Brad wasn't the type to let a challenge slide, especially not one aired in front of others. The man thrived on control, and Eli's refusal to bow had clearly rattled him. Now, Brad was circling, looking to reassert his dominance by undermining Eli's work. But Eli wasn't about to let him win. As the day wore on, Eli buried himself in the report, his focus razor-sharp. He pored over every figure, cross-referencing data and filling in gaps where information had been conveniently omitted. It was grueling work, the kind that tested patience and resolve, especially when the missing pieces felt deliberate. Frustration gnawed at him, but Eli kept his cool, knowing Brad was banking on him buckling under pressure. By late afternoon, the report was complete, every detail polished and verified. Eli gathered the documents and strode to Brad's office, where the door stood slightly ajar. Inside, Brad lounged in his chair, exuding the smug confidence of someone who thought he held all the cards. Eli knocked lightly and stepped inside. "Here's the report," he said, placing the folder on Brad's desk. Brad's eyebrow arched, surprise flickering across his face. "Already? That was fast." He picked up the report, flipping through it with a practiced eye, searching for any flaw he could exploit. Eli stood calmly, watching as Brad's expression shifted, page after page. The man's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as he realized there were no errors to pounce on. Brad closed the folder with a snap. "I'll look it over more thoroughly later," he said, his tone clipped, the tension in his voice betraying his frustration. Eli nodded and left without a word. But as he returned to his desk, he knew this was far from over. Brad wasn't the type to let a setback go unanswered. He'd be waiting, biding his time for another chance to tear Eli down. But Eli was patient. He understood that every move Brad made only exposed more of his true character to the rest of the office. And soon, Brad wouldn't just be sparring with a colleague, he'd be facing the company's new CEO. The office buzzed with its usual rhythm, but the undercurrent of tension between Eli and Brad had reached a boiling point. After their clash in the break room and the tussle over the doctored report, Eli knew Brad was nursing a grudge. The man wasn't one to forgive or forget, and now he was hell-bent on making Eli pay for daring to challenge him in public. By midweek, Brad seized his opportunity. Another data report landed on Eli's desk. Similar to the last, but with a tighter deadline and a tangle of files from multiple departments. On the surface, it looked like standard busy work, tedious but manageable. Eli dove in, methodically sifting through the data, but as he dug deeper, red flags began to emerge. Numbers didn't add up. Files contradicted each other. At first, he chalked it up to sloppy work from another team. But the deeper he went, the more deliberate the inconsistencies seemed. This wasn't an accident. Brad had orchestrated the chaos, structuring the files so the errors would only surface in the final report. Too late for Eli to catch without access to the original source data, which, unsurprisingly, Brad hadn't provided. Eli's frustration mounted as he wrestled with the mess, the looming deadline leaving no time to request the missing information without looking like he was dodging responsibility. Brad had played his hand masterfully. Eli submitted the report on time, fully aware that the hidden errors would come back to haunt him. He had no choice, missed the deadline, and Brad would paint him as incompetent, submit it, and the mistakes would be pinned on him. The fallout was swift and brutal. The next morning, an email from Brad landed in Eli's inbox, copied to several senior managers and the department head for maximum impact. The message was a masterclass in corporate warfare, dripping with false concern. Eli, the report you submitted contains multiple errors. These discrepancies are serious and need immediate correction. Given the importance of this data, this cannot be overlooked. Senior management has been informed. Brad Thompson. The email hit like a sucker punch. This wasn't just a jab. It was a calculated strike meant to humiliate Eli in front of the company's leadership. Brad had framed him perfectly, ensuring any defense would sound like a desperate excuse. Eli sat at his desk, the weight of the office's sidelong glances pressing down on him. Whispers rippled through the cubicles, colleagues speculating about his next move. Brad had set the stage, and now everyone was watching to see if Eli would crumble. But Eli wasn't about to let this slide. He took a deep breath, stood, and marched straight to Brad's office, ignoring the curious stares trailing him. Brad was at his desk, feigning busyness. But Eli could tell he had been waiting for this moment. Without knocking, Eli stepped inside and closed the door. "Brad, we need to talk." Brad looked up, his face a mask of mock surprise. "Eli, is something wrong?" Eli didn't mince words. "You sabotaged that report. The data you gave me was incomplete, and you set me up to fail." Brad leaned back, a smirk creeping across his face. "That's a bold accusation. Eli, you sure you want to play that card?" Eli crossed his arms, his voice steady. "I know what you did. You rigged the files so the numbers wouldn't match, and now you're trying to pin the blame on me." Brad's smirk widened as he stood, circling his desk to stand face to face with Eli. "Even if that were true, and it's not, do you really think anyone's going to believe you?" His voice dropped, laced with condescension. "I've been here for years, Eli. People trust me. You're just the new guy. No one's going to take your word over mine. I made sure of that." Eli's fists clenched, but his expression remained calm. "I can prove it. I kept the original files you sent me." Brad laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "Oh, Eli, you're not getting it. Nobody cares about your proof. Not the senior managers, not the department head. As far as they're concerned, you're the one who dropped the ball." Brad's arrogance was infuriating. But Eli knew he wasn't entirely wrong. Brad had spent years cultivating alliances, greasing the wheels of office politics. Walton's culture rewarded people like him, manipulators who thrived in the cracks of a broken system. Eli was still an outsider, his credibility untested, but he wasn't backing down. "You think you've got this all figured out," Eli said, his voice low but firm. "But this isn't over. You can keep trying to tear me down, but I'm not going anywhere." Brad raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "We'll see about that." Eli turned and left, the weight of the confrontation settling heavily on him. Brad had won this round. No question. The damage was done, and the office was buzzing with gossip. But as Eli returned to his desk, his resolve only hardened. He hadn't come to Walton Industries to play small. He was here for a reason, handpicked by the company's founder, Jim Hartman, to root out the rot and rebuild from the ground up. Eli had agreed to work undercover, blending in to observe the company's true culture before stepping into the CEO role. Now, after weeks of watching Brad's toxic games, he saw the problem clearly. Brad wasn't just a bad manager, he was a symptom of a deeper disease, one that had festered in Walton's halls for too long. Eli sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen, though his thoughts were far from the numbers in front of him. Brad's email lingered in his mind, not because it was a surprise, but because it marked a turning point. Brad had made his move, and it had worked. The public shaming, the doctored report, it had all been designed to break Eli's credibility. But Eli wasn't here to play Brad's game. He was here to change the rules. His mind drifted to the upcoming CEO announcement. He'd stayed in the shadows long enough, watching, learning, and cataloging the dysfunction that plagued Walton Industries. But the time for observation was over. Brad had no idea who Eli really was, just another ambitious upstart. As far as he was concerned, he didn't know Eli held the backing of the company's founder or that he was poised to take the helm. Brad might have won this battle, but Eli was playing for the war. And when the truth came out, Brad wouldn't just be facing a colleague, he'd be facing the new CEO, armed with the truth and ready to dismantle the toxic empire Brad had built. Eli James sat at his desk, the hum of the office around him a familiar backdrop to his quiet determination. To everyone else, he was just another cog in the machine at Walton Industries, a new employee who kept his head down and did his work. But Brad Thompson, the slick, manipulative manager who thrived on office politics, saw Eli as something else, a minor nuisance, a nobody he could squash with a few sharp words or a well-timed email. Brad had no idea who he was really dealing with, and that ignorance was about to cost him dearly. In just a few days, everything would change. Walton Industries was on the verge of a major announcement, one that would shake the very foundation of the company. The board was set to name a new CEO, and when that moment came, Brad's carefully constructed world of deceit and sabotage would come crashing down. Eli wasn't just another employee, he was the man who had been chosen to lead. The thought of stepping into that role filled Eli with a quiet resolve. He wasn't here to play Brad's petty games or get dragged into the mud of office drama. He had a vision, a plan that stretched far beyond the small-minded power struggles that had defined the company for too long. For now, Eli bided his time. He moved through the office with purpose, observing everything: the whispered conversations, the subtle alliances, the toxic undercurrents that Brad had fostered. Brad thought he was untouchable, throwing around accusations and undermining anyone who threatened his grip on power. But Eli saw through it all. He saw the way Brad's arrogance blinded him, the way he underestimated those around him. Brad didn't realize he was up against someone who thrived on strategy, someone who knew how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. As Eli glanced around the office, he thought of his coworkers, many of whom had spent years navigating Brad's manipulative reign. They'd adapted to survive, keeping their heads down and their voices low. But Eli could see the toll it had taken. He thought of Sarah, a veteran employee who had pulled him aside early on to warn him about the way things worked at Walton Industries. Her cautious words had painted a clear picture of the deep-rooted issues that plagued the company, and Eli had listened carefully, filing away every detail. Sarah didn't know it yet, but her honesty had helped shape the plan that was now unfolding. Standing up from his desk, Eli walked to the large windows at the back of the office, the city skyline stretching out before him. The view was a reminder of what was at stake, not just his own future, but the future of everyone in the company. Change was coming, a storm brewing on the horizon, and Brad would be at its center. Eli's grip tightened on the windowsill as he made a silent promise to himself under his leadership. Walton Industries would be a place where talent was nurtured, not crushed. There would be no room for the kind of toxic behavior that had festered under Brad's watch. No more whispered campaigns to ruin careers. No more sabotage disguised as teamwork. The announcement was just days away, and when it came, Brad would face the truth and Eli would be the one to deliver it. The morning of the announcement arrived, and the office buzzed with a nervous energy. An email had gone out earlier, summoning everyone to the large conference room for a company-wide meeting. Speculation rippled through the cubicles as employees exchanged curious glances, wondering what could be so important. Eli sat calmly at his desk, the weight of the moment settling over him. For weeks, he had played the part of the unassuming newcomer, watching and learning, taking mental notes on the company's culture and the people who shaped it. Today, that role would end. Across the office, Brad was visibly on edge. Eli had noticed it all morning, Brad pacing in his glass-walled office, checking his phone obsessively, throwing sharp glances in Eli's direction. He must have sensed something was off, but he couldn't possibly know the magnitude of what was coming. Brad's smug confidence, the kind that came from years of getting away with his schemes, was starting to crack. Just before the meeting, Jim Hartman, the company's founder, stepped onto the office floor. Jim was a respected figure, known for his warmth and approachability, but there was no denying that Walton Industries had lost its way in recent years. That was why Jim had brought Eli on board, not as the quiet employee everyone assumed, but as the leader who would steer the company back on course. Jim's voice carried across the office as he greeted employees, pausing briefly at Brad's desk for a quick exchange of pleasantries. Brad, ever the performer, flashed a grin, but Eli caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. Eli met Brad's glance with a polite nod, his expression carefully neutral. The moment was almost here. "Let's gather in the conference room," Jim called out, his tone authoritative yet warm. "We've got an important announcement to make." The office sprang to life, employees filing toward the conference room, their conversations growing louder as they speculated about what was coming. Eli walked among them, his heart beating a little faster but his mind steady. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Inside the conference room, the air crackled with anticipation. Employees filled the seats, their eyes darting toward Jim, who stood at the front with a commanding presence. Brad lingered off to the side, his usual smug grin plastered on his face. Though it was clear he had no idea what was about to hit him, to him, this was probably just another routine update, a chance to schmooze with whoever was in charge. Jim cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for being here," Jim began, his voice steady. "There's been a lot of talk lately about changes at Walton Industries, and today I'm here to share one of the most significant changes we've made in years." He paused, letting the tension build. For some time, we've been searching for a new CEO, someone with the vision and strength to lead this company into a brighter future. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce that person. The room was still, every eye fixed on Jim. Brad stood near the front, looking relaxed, probably thinking he could charm his way into the new CEO's good graces, just as he'd done with so many others. Jim smiled, turning slightly toward the audience. "I'm proud to announce that Eli James will be stepping into the role of CEO of Walton Industries." A stunned silence swept through the room. Brad's face froze, his smug grin faltering into a mask of confusion. Then shock. His eyes locked on Eli, as if he couldn't process the words he'd just heard. Eli stood, his heart pounding, but his demeanor calm, and walked toward the front of the room. All eyes were on him now, the weight of the moment pressing down, but also lifting him up. This was what he'd been working toward, the moment when everything would change. As Eli reached Jim's side, he could feel Brad's stare burning into him. Brad's face had gone pale, his mouth slightly open, as if he were struggling to comprehend the reality unfolding before him. The man he dismissed, the man he tried to undermine and destroy, was now standing at the front of the room as his new boss. Jim clapped Eli on the back, his voice booming with pride. Eli brings a wealth of experience and a fresh perspective to this role, and I have complete confidence that he'll lead Walton Industries into a new era of success. I've had the privilege of getting to know Eli over the past few months, and I can tell you, we're in good hands. The room remained hushed, the weight of the announcement sinking in. Eli turned to face the employees, his expression steady but his mind racing with the significance of the moment. "Thank you, Jim," he began, his voice clear and confident. It's an honor to step into this role. Over the past few weeks, I've had the chance to see the talent and dedication that make this company what it is, but I haven't been watching from the outside." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, watching as the crowd shifted uncomfortably. "I've been working undercover," Eli continued, his tone deliberate. "I was brought into this company not as the CEO you see today, but as a regular employee. I wanted to understand the culture firsthand, to see how things really work, how people are treated, how leadership operates, and where we need to improve." The room was utterly silent now, the realization dawning on everyone that the quiet new hire had been watching their every move. Eyes widened, and glances were exchanged as the truth settled in. "I've seen a lot during my time here," Eli said, his gaze sweeping the room. "I've seen the passion and hard work of so many of you, but I've also seen things that need to change: attitudes, behaviors, and practices that have no place in a company that values integrity and respect." His eyes landed on Brad, who was staring at him with a mix of disbelief and growing panic. Brad's hands were clenched at his sides, his usual confidence crumbling under the weight of what was happening. "I want to be clear," Eli continued, his voice firm but measured. "Under my leadership, Walton Industries will be a place where respect, accountability, and fairness are the foundation of everything we do. There will be no room for manipulation, sabotage, or mistreatment of employees." The message was unmistakable, and though Eli didn't name Brad directly, everyone in the room knew exactly who he was talking about. Brad's face flushed red, his fists tightening as he lost control of the room and the company. Jim stepped forward again, his smile wide. "I couldn't have said it better myself. I'm excited for what the future holds under Eli's leadership. Let's give him a warm welcome." The room erupted into applause, though the shock still lingered. Some employees clapped enthusiastically, their faces lit with hope, while others, particularly those loyal to Brad, looked uneasy. Brad stood rigid, his fury and fear barely concealed beneath the surface. As the applause faded, Eli's gaze found Brad once more. Their eyes locked, and Eli gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. The tables had turned, and Brad had no idea what was coming next. But one thing was certain: his days of manipulation and sabotage were over. Eli stepped down from the front of the room, a quiet smile on his face as he prepared to take on his new role. The game was just beginning. The next morning, the office was alive with chatter. News of Eli's appointment had spread like wildfire, and employees were still grappling with the revelation that the unassuming new hire had been observing them all along. But one person was noticeably absent from the buzz: Brad. Eli had called him into his office for a private meeting, one that would mark the final chapter of Brad's reign at Walton Industries. Eli knew this confrontation wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. Brad had to answer for his actions, the lies, the sabotage, the toxic environment he'd cultivated for years. When the door to Eli's office opened, Brad stepped inside, his face a mix of barely concealed anger and forced professionalism. The swagger that had defined him was gone, replaced by a darker, more desperate energy. He knew why he was here, but there was still a flicker of hope in his eyes, as if he thought he could talk his way out of the consequences. "Brad, have a seat," Eli said calmly, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "We need to talk." Brad hesitated, his eyes darting to the folder on Eli's desk, a growing sense of unease creeping into his posture. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice betraying the fact that he already knew. Eli leaned forward, his hands resting on the desk, his gaze steady. "It's about accountability. Brad, it's about the choices you've made and the impact they've had on this company and the people in it." Brad's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his silence a stark contrast to the bluster he'd relied on for so long. Eli opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents, emails, reports, and testimonies that painted a clear picture of Brad's actions. "You've spent years building a culture of fear and division," Eli said, his voice even but firm. "You've undermined your colleagues, sabotaged projects, and manipulated your way to the top. But that ends now." Brad's face paled, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. "You don't have the full story," he started, his voice low, almost pleading. "I was just doing what it takes to succeed in this business." Eli shook his head. "This isn't about success, Brad. It's about integrity. And that's something you've lost sight of." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You have two options: resign quietly by the end of the day, or face a formal investigation into your conduct. The evidence is clear, and the board is fully aware of it." The room was silent, the air thick with tension. Brad's eyes darted to the folder, then back to Eli, his desperation giving way to resignation. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. For the first time, Brad Thompson had no defense, no scheme to fall back on. Eli stood, and his voice steady. "This company is moving forward. Brad, it's time for you to decide how you want to leave it." As Brad left the office, his shoulders slumped and his face ashen, Eli felt a sense of closure. The storm had passed, and now the real work could begin. Walton Industries was his to lead, and he would make good on his promise to build a company where respect and fairness reigned, where talent could thrive without fear of sabotage. The future was bright, and Eli was ready to shape it. For weeks, Brad's behavior had been under scrutiny, but the truth stretched back years. His eyes narrowed as he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, radiating defiance. "If this is about those complaints, Eli, they're nonsense. People just didn't like my style. But I've done nothing wrong. I've been with Walton Industries forever. I've earned my place." Eli didn't waver. With a steady hand, he opened a thick folder on his desk, revealing a stack of meticulously organized reports and documents. Each page chronicled years of grievances against Brad, accusations of manipulation, bullying, and deliberate sabotage. "I've read every single one of these, Brad," Eli said, his voice calm but firm. "They paint a clear picture. You've been intimidating and undermining people for years, using your position to silence anyone who dared challenge you." Brad let out a dismissive scoff, his arms tightening defensively. "Come on, Eli. You've been here, what, a few months? You don't understand how things work around here. People blow things out of proportion when they don't get what they want." Eli's eyebrow arched, his composure unshaken. "I understand exactly how this place works, Brad. I've spent weeks observing, seeing it all up close, how you rule through fear, how you manipulate to maintain control, how you crush anyone who threatens your authority." Brad's smirk flickered, but he clung to his bravado. "This is all hearsay. You've got no real proof." Eli's gaze sharpened as he slid the folder closer to Brad. "I have more than enough proof. Complaints buried, reports ignored because you convinced people you were untouchable. And let's not forget your latest move." His voice grew colder, cutting through the air. "You sabotaged that report. Brad, you fed me incomplete data, then tried to pin the mistakes on me to make me look incompetent in front of senior management." Brad's face flushed with anger, his fists clenching. "That's absurd," he snapped. But Eli pressed on, unrelenting. "You set me up to fail, but you didn't count on one thing: I had the original files. I can prove you altered the data." Eli's words landed like a hammer, each one stripping away Brad's defenses. Brad shot to his feet, his rage boiling over. You think you can just waltz in here, throw around accusations, and everyone will buy it. I've been here for years. I know these people better than you ever will. You're just some rookie who thinks he can shake things up. You don't have the clout to take me down. Eli rose slowly, meeting Brad's fury with a quiet, unshakable strength. I'm not just some rookie, Brad. I'm the CEO. And I don't need anyone to take my word for it. The evidence speaks for itself. Brad's expression shifted from anger to desperation. For years, he'd been the puppet master, pulling strings and bending others to his will. But now he faced someone he couldn't manipulate, someone who'd seen through every lie. You can't do this, Brad muttered, his voice trembling. I've given too much to this company. You think you can make it better without me? Eli's eyes never left Brad's. I'm going to make it better because you won't be here. Your time at Walton Industries is over. He picked up the folder, his tone final. I've already spoken to HR. With this documentation, I have more than enough to terminate your employment. Brad's hands tightened at his sides. His jaw locked as he searched for an escape. But there was none. You can't do this, he repeated. Weaker now, weaker. It's already done, Eli said, his voice steady and resolute. The words hung heavy in the air. Brad stood frozen for a moment, the weight of his defeat sinking in. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out, the door slamming behind him with a resounding thud. Eli exhaled, the tension of the confrontation still pulsing through the room. But it was done. Brad's reign of manipulation and sabotage was over. As Eli sank back into his chair, he felt the first spark of relief. The hardest step was behind him, but it was only the beginning of the transformation he planned for Walton Industries. As the day drew to a close, the office was quieter than usual. The hum of activity replaced by a stillness that felt almost reverent. Eli sat at his desk, watching the sunset cast a golden glow over the city skyline. His office, once a distant symbol of power, now felt like a space brimming with possibility and responsibility. The events of the past few weeks replayed in his mind, each moment a stepping stone to this one, his new role as CEO of Walton Industries. When Jim Hartman, the company's founder, had first approached Eli about taking on the challenge, Eli knew it wouldn't be easy. Leading a company like Walton Industries meant more than navigating financial reports or strategic plans. It meant confronting a deeply rooted culture that had allowed people like Brad to flourish unchecked for far too long. Eli hadn't fully grasped the extent of the toxicity until he'd experienced it firsthand. Going undercover, working side by side with employees, had opened his eyes to the subtle manipulations and overt power plays that had festered beneath the surface. Brad was the embodiment of everything wrong with the company: his need for control, his willingness to sabotage anyone who stood in his way, and his relentless undermining of talent were symptoms of a broader disease. Eli thought back to his early days at Walton Industries. At first, employees had been wary of him, this quiet newcomer who didn't quite fit the corporate mold. But over time, he'd earned their trust. Listening to their stories of working under Brad's shadow, how ambition was stifled, how talent was overlooked in favor of loyalty to the wrong people. One moment stood out vividly: the break room incident. Brad had tried to assert his dominance with a casual, racist remark, a power move meant to humiliate Eli and remind everyone who was in charge. But Eli had stayed calm, responding with a quiet confidence that shifted the room's dynamic. That moment wasn't just about him, it was about the countless others who'd endured Brad's cruelty in silence. It had fueled Eli's determination to dismantle the false empire Brad had built. Then came the sabotage. Brad's attempt to undermine Eli by feeding him falsified data was a desperate, reckless move. It revealed just how threatened he felt by Eli's presence. Eli could have called him out immediately, but he'd chosen patience, letting Brad believe he'd won. When the time came, Eli revealed the truth along with his new role as CEO. The announcement had been a turning point. The shock on Brad's face, the dawning realization that his power was slipping away, confirmed that Eli was on the right path. But Brad's exit was only the first step. Walton Industries wasn't just plagued by one toxic manager, it was burdened by a culture that had enabled people like Brad for years. Eli's mission now was to rebuild that culture, to create an environment where employees felt valued, respected, and empowered to succeed. He thought of the conversations he'd had with Sarah and Ear, who'd known about the problems for years but lacked the authority to act. Now, with Eli at the helm, they had a chance to reshape the company from the ground up. Eli's gaze drifted to the plans on his desk, his vision for the future. Transparency, accountability, and respect were his cornerstones. He wanted an open-door policy where employees could speak freely without fear of retaliation. He envisioned leadership training to ensure managers weren't just technically skilled, but also capable of inspiring and uplifting their teams. Above all, he wanted a culture of fairness, where promotions were based on merit, not politics or favoritism. The weight of his role settled on his shoulders, but Eli welcomed it. Change wouldn't come easily. There would be resistance, especially from those who'd thrived under the old system. But Eli was prepared. He'd spent weeks learning the company's inner workings, from the ground floor to the boardroom. Now, as CEO, he had the authority to make the changes Walton Industries desperately needed. His thoughts turned to the people who'd supported him. Sarah had been a quiet but invaluable ally, providing insights and information without ever seeking the spotlight. She, like so many others, had longed for change but hadn't known how to spark it. Eli vowed to honor that loyalty by building a workplace where people like Sarah could thrive. And then there was Jim Hartman, who'd entrusted Eli with the company he'd built from nothing. Jim had seen that Walton Industries needed new leadership to survive in a changing world, and Eli was determined to prove that trust was well placed. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Eli felt a quiet resolve settle over him. This was his moment. The foundation was set, and now it was time to build something better, a company defined by integrity, respect, and opportunity. The era of manipulation and sabotage was over, and a new chapter for Walton Industries had begun. With the future in his hands, Eli was ready to lead.